It's good? Okay,
Yeah.
all right, start. Okay, so if you're going to teach students after you've, done city residential driving and you've done parallel parking, three-point turn, and etc., you would naturally progress onto the main roads. So what would you teach first? Would you start off with the traffic lights where the student would make a left, or would you rather teach the student to the right?
I would think the right.
That's correct. And the reason for so it's very easy to understand. Right turn, there's really only limited number of things that you could actually encounter as conflict, such as, let's say, pedestrians that's crossing, um, cars that might be turning from the other side, and pedestrians and cyclists that may be coming in from the blind spot. But it's still somewhat limited. And since the student has been taught how to do this properly in the residential area, there's not much of a change in terms of the steps. Right? Whereas left turns, you have to go and apply the lane changes. You have to get into the left-hand turning lane. There are multiple mirror and blind spot checks that's required. You then have to wait at the correct position. If there's cars in front, you're gonna have to wait further back. And there's certain situations where you have to go into the intersection, and you also have to look at the light to see when it changes and see if there's cars that's in conflict with you, as well as pedestrians that's crossing, and also cyclists and all that coming from the blind spot area. And once you turn, you have to go into the correct corresponding lane, and then also having to keep to the right, which, if you look at it, it's much more complicated.
It is.
That's why it's called a complex left turn.
Okay.
Got it?
Gotcha.
And for right turns, there's really two scenarios. The first one here is when you're making a turn on a green light, whereas the other one here is turning on a red light. So let's go with the green light first. So as you approach any intersection and there's an open lane that's added for the right-hand turn, then you must enter the lane. And naturally, you would apply mirror signal blind spot to get into the lane. Am I correct?
Correct.
Once you get into the lane, you would start slowing down. Now, in the residential area, we said it's preferably to have the speed control around 15 to 20 kilometers per hour to make the turn, correct? Whereas the complex right turn, you would actually control the speed a bit higher, somewhere between 20 to 25 would be a more reasonable speed to control, because there's more spacing that's available, and the student does not really need to be taught hand over hand anymore, because he or she already knows how to do it. That's why you're progressing to the main roads. Got it? As you get closer to this here, you would need a secondary blind spot check. This is the one we have on approach. And the reason for this is we are really teaching according to the road test requirements. And if you do recall in the classroom, we've talked about this, and I'm not sure if both of you remember or not, but regardless, I will go through this on the sheet. So you see this here? There's left and right hand turns, and there's the approach. And on the approach, the examiner is expecting a mirror check and a blind spot check. Well, this here is basically the approach, as in we get into the lane, we're about to start our turn. That's called the approach. From here, where you enter the lane, to where you stop, that's all part of approach. As you actually approach, check your blind spot, you would check and scan the intersection to see it's safe. So in other words, if there's no one running a red light, if there's no cars turning in conflict with you, there's no pedestrians that's crossing here, that's what you're scanning for. And from here, you'd look for a gap. Now, a safe gap meaning if there's a car that's turning, already starting the turn, especially if there's only two lanes available, don't bother going. If you go at the same time, yeah, technically you could both end up going at the same time, and you have your own lane to go into as the corresponding lane. However, you frequently see, 90% of the drivers out there would actually make a turn and they would go into the wrong lane. Do you agree?
Yes.
So that's why we can't take that chance. We need to let the drivers start the turn first before we go. That's also known as time offset.
Okay.
Safe gap for traffic. So you see where it says in white text, avoid turning with left turning vehicle. Because if they wanted to go, let them go first. If they're waiting there and they're not moving, then we'll initiate our turn.
Okay.
Right? And because here, as a reminder, if stopped, that means if you didn't have to stop, only one blind spot on the approach is required to satisfy the road test. If you need to stop, let's say you had pedestrians here, or you're waiting for this car, and you had to stop here for 2, 3, 4 seconds or so, a blind spot check is required to complete the turn. because you want to make sure that there's no other pedestrians or cyclists that could let's say, came from the plaza on the side or from a bus stop or something that this came out all of a sudden. Before you complete your turn, you would actually tell your student to scan ahead, steer towards it. And this basically means look and scan ahead and speed up, loosen up, in other words. And then once you go into the corresponding lane, which is the closest lane available if it's on the right. If it's on the left, it will be the closest lane close to the middle of the road. Right? Once you have completed your turn, you would actually speed up, loosen up, and look for a speed limit sign that's posted.
Okay.
Right? And naturally, if there's no speed limit sign, we always teach our students to treat it as 50. Is that clear enough?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So this is for a right turn on a green light. If it's a red light, there's only a slight difference. So mirror signal blind spot on the approach is still the same. The biggest difference, of course, is we always have to come to a complete stop and yield to traffic. Now, yielding meaning there's pedestrians from each side here and the cross traffic from the left. That's our main concern. There should not be oncoming traffic that's turning left with us because of the fact that it's a red light. Right? And once we stop, we then scan the intersection. So just like in the residential area, I said this before, there's a habit that a lot of drivers have, including yourself, that would always start scanning first and then stop. Well, why not focus on the stopping first and then scan? If it's necessary and there's a vehicle blocking your view, then you inch up. When you inch up, you go quarter right, just the same as before, so we can get a better view and angle the vehicle towards the turn. Once we see a safe gap, and again, a safe gap would mean 3 lampposts. So if you're teaching with this diagram, William, you just have to tell your student, okay, from here, look for 1, 2, 3 lampposts. You see, I have specifically combined these 2 pages to make sure it's in view of the left for that reason. So that we could give the student an idea that this is how far the cars should be. If it's here or farther, you would go. If it's less than that, don't go.
Okay.
Easy enough to understand?
Yeah.
All right. And once you have determined that it's safe, because the fact that you have to stop, a secondary blind spot check is required to satisfy the road test. And this is where this comes in. So you see, on approach, we need the blind spot check, but turning, blind spot check again. This is why it's 2 of them. And I have both of them, approach and completion, satisfying the road test.
Okay.
Okay, and scan ahead, steer, go into the corresponding lane, speed up, loosen up, and look for the speed limit sign.
Okay.
Not much of a difference, is it?
Not much of a difference, no.
Yeah. All right.